Oasis Life Church would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, study, work, worship and meet, the Barada Barna people. We also pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to other Indigenous people who are with us today.
Man, we've had a busy morning today. I was in a sweat before we even got here. We've been out chasing bats from our backyard this morning, trying to get rid of them. We've got them roosting in two trees at the back. It is sending us batty, mate, but as I said to Teresa during the week, there's people a lot worse off than us that have got, a lot more bats and closer to their house than what we have. So we'll keep trying. We'll go through the different options to try and get rid of them. They're lovely animals, but we just don't want them in our backyard, do we? Hey? I'm sure they have a purpose somewhere in God's creation, just not in our backyard. So, I'm just going to read through some scripture and we'll talk about some things along the way, okay? Is that all right with everyone? Hopefully I won't bore you too much. So we're going to start off with chapter 4, verse 1. And the title of this today is, I was thinking about, I thought, what can I call this today? I thought, God's in the middle. So we'll see how that plays out, eh? So, one day the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha and cried out, "My husband, who served you, is dead, and you know how he feared the Lord, but now a creditor has come threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves." So, it's a pretty dire story, isn't it? So obviously, lovely family, husband and wife, 2 kids, 2 boys. The father's been serving Elisha. He's a member of the group of the prophets. So he's been doing God's work all the time. For some reason, he's died. And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose in the family. Now, I think sometimes we read over, I know I do, I read over all of this. And yes, you read a story, but it doesn't really sink in about how real this is in our life. This is everyday life. A family, the husband dies, wife dies, the other person's got to deal with what's left, don't they? This is real, and I've started recently sort of going a little bit deeper into the stories and trying to, there's lots of stories within stories, and trying to find the nuts and bolts of it all to work out why they say what they say. Because there's lots of times we read things and we just sort of gloss over it. So, family in trouble, husband's died, wife says to Elisha, he was a good man, he served you, but now we're in real trouble. And Elisha says, well, what can I do to help you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? And her response, nothing at all, except a flask of olive oil, she said. That's all she's got in the house, a flask of olive oil. So what does that tell you? If you look a little bit deeper, I would suggest that when husband was alive, they had a bit more than a flask of olive oil in the house when he was earning an income each week. They've got to a point where she's had to sell everything except this last flask of olive oil. That's all they've got left. This is serious stuff, isn't it? And now they're at such a dire consequence that the creditors, people they owe money to, in today's terms would be banks and finance people and maybe friends and family, they've said, we want our money. It's time for you to pay up. In the midst of miracles, it's not all about just sitting around and praying and doing nothing. For a miracle to happen, we have to take an active part in it, right? It's not just about praying, God, help me. So Elisha says to her, borrow as many jars as you can from your friends and neighbours. Then go into your house with your sons and shut the door behind you. Pour olive oil from your flask into the jars, setting each one aside when it's filled. So can you imagine, she's so far down that she's now having to go to her friends and neighbours and start to beg and borrow from them. So she's at a point in her life where things are very drastic. Can you imagine, no one wants to be in that situation. We've got to start walking the streets to our neighbours and saying, look, I'm in so much trouble. Can I borrow some empty jars from you? This is all I've got left. You know, you get to a bad place. And another thing that stood out to me is he said to her, go and take them into your house, but shut the door behind you. And I thought, well, why is that so important? And it sort of comes about that it's so that she doesn't get distracted or no one comes and disturbs them while they're doing what they've been told to do. Distractions can stop everything. Sometimes we need to shut the door on things so that we don't get distracted. You know, sometimes it might be, in my case, turning the telly off. Because who knows when you're trying to study the Word of God or something and there's noise happening around you, it's a distraction. You need to shut the door on things so that you can get done what you need to get done. So she did what she was told. Her sons kept bringing jars to her and she filled one after another. Soon every container was full to the brim. Bring me another jar, she said to one of her sons. There aren't any more, he told her, and then the olive oil stopped flowing. When she told the man of God what had happened, he said to her, now sell the olive oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live off what's left over. And this just shows you how many jars of olive oil must they have filled. You know, if she only had one left over and they've filled sufficient that they can pay all their debts and then still have enough to live on. This just shows you, doesn't it, that God is a God of provision, that he doesn't always just meet our needs, he provides a little bit extra. You know, what sort of situation would she have been in if they'd have just cleared their debts and then didn't have enough to live on? You know, the word tells us that we're to look after widows and orphans, doesn't it? This is God doing it firsthand. Not only has he cleared the debt, but he's made sure she's got enough to live on and bring up the sons until they're of a working age. God is good, hey? Can you imagine the two sons, what stories they would have to tell after this miracle happened? Can you imagine them going out and saying, people are saying, well, how have you were just about to get thrown out of your house. Oh yeah, but Mum filled 1,000 jars from that little jar of olive oil we had in the pantry. And we've sold it, and now we've got enough to live on for the rest of our lives. Can you imagine these stories? Can you imagine, translate this into your own lives today? You know, we get to the point where we've got nothing except God. And that's enough to get us through, isn't it? The next story talks about Elisha and a woman from Shunem. One day Elisha went to the town of Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there, and she urged him to come to her home for a meal. After that, whenever he passed that way, he would stop there for something to eat. So this is the total opposite of the previous story, isn't it? So it says a wealthy woman. So she didn't have the same problems as the other woman, did she? But as we're going to see, she has some problems. She said to her husband, I'm sure that the man who stops here from time to time is a holy man of God. So how would she know that? How would she have worked that out? He obviously hasn't told her. Maybe by his fruit. Maybe by the way he speaks when he was there, when she saw him. Maybe by the way he carries himself. You know, the Bible talks about the fruits of the Spirit, doesn't it? And how we're to be salt and light out and around the place. It sounds like Elisha was salt and light to this lady. And she could feel and know from the way he carried himself that he was a man of God. Wouldn't it be good if we had people talk about us like that? You know, they don't know that we come to church at Oasis Life, but they say after we're gone, gee, I think he's a man of God. I think he's a woman of God. Wouldn't that be good if people talk about us like that? So she said, let's build a small room for him on the roof and furnish it with a bed, a table, a chair and a lamp. Then he'll have a place to stay whenever he comes by. So obviously this man of God has had a bit of an impact on this lady, hasn't he? The fact that she's willing to go and build a penthouse for him and furnish it so he's got somewhere to stay whenever he comes by town. One day Elisha returned to Shunem. He went up to this upper room to rest. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Tell the woman from Shunem I want to speak to her." When she appeared, Elisha said to Gehazi, "Tell her, we appreciate the kind concern you have shown us. What can we do for you? Can we put in a good word for you to the king or to the commander of the army?" And she replies, "No. My family takes good care of me." So she's got everything. There's nothing that this prophet can do for her. As far as she's concerned, she's happy. She's got everything she needs materially. Plenty of money, plenty of food, lovely house, no problems in her life. Except Gehazi replied, she doesn't have a son, and her husband is an old man. So obviously, she's a bit younger. We don't know what age she is. And it says that her husband is an old man and there's no son. So the family name's not going to get carried on. So these were big things back in those days. You need a son to carry on the family name and to take over the business and everything that was going on. So Elisha said, "Call her back again." When the woman returned, Elisha said to her as she stood in the doorway, "Next year at this time, you'll be holding a son in your arms." Can you imagine that? Next time at this year, you'll be holding a son in your arms. Now, how did Elisha know that that's what she wanted? Did she ask for it? Had she spoken of it? We don't know all these things, do we? They've obviously had conversations in the times they've been together. And what does she say? "No, my Lord," she cried. "Oh, man of God, don't deceive me and get my hopes up like that." So from that response, we can see that she deeply, deeply, really would have loved a son. Hey, don't get my hopes up like that. Don't deceive me. So really inside, where she said, "Look, you can't do anything for me. I've got everything. I don't need anything, except I'd love to have a son." But she wasn't even game to say that. Isn't it interesting that here's a prophet of God with her saying, "What can we do for you? You name it, we'll do it. God will do it for you." And she wasn't even game enough to say, "Gee, I'd love to have a son." Because it just seemed so unreal, didn't it? This is where miracles come from. Areas in our life that just seem so far-fetched, so unreal, that we don't believe no matter what that they could happen. You know, that person in our life, that brother, that sister, that uncle, that aunt, that child that's so far from God, that could never happen. They could never change unless God gets in, unless God gets involved. And we see some dry bones start to rattle. It can happen, can't it? We've seen it. We've read about it. We've been part of it. But sure enough, the woman soon became pregnant. And at that time, the following year, she had a son, just as Elijah had said. So 1 year later, it's proven. You know, miracle. The facts are there. One day, when her child was older, we don't know exactly how far along this was or how much later, but it says the child went out to help his father who was working with the harvesters. So he's obviously old enough to be going out to work. Suddenly the child cried out, "My head hurts, my head hurts." His father said to one of the servants, "Carry him home to his mother." It's interesting, isn't it? You know, as a father, Work always comes first. You know, here's your one and only son that's a miracle in your life you never thought you were going to have, screaming out, my head hurts, my head hurts. Hey Ed, come and take my boy home, will you? I'm too busy. I thought that was interesting. So I've been in that position where I've put others before my kids. So the servant took him home and his mother held him on her lap. But around noontime, he died. She carried him up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and then shut the door and left him there. And I thought this was really interesting too. I thought, well, obviously this kid lives in the house with his mum and dad downstairs. Why has she carried him upstairs and put him on the bed of the prophet and then shut the door and walked out? And I don't have any specific answers, but I can only assume that because she believed that he was a man of God, that there must have been some power where he's been. And that was all she was grasping onto at this point in time. That was the only hope she had. That, look, this man of God, he can do miracles. Maybe if I put my kid on his bed, it might just hold him sufficiently until I can get some help. And she sent a message to her husband, send one of the servants and a donkey so that I can hurry to the man of God and come right back. In today's terms, it's hardly hurrying on a donkey, is it? You know, but back then it obviously would have been the quickest form of transport. So send one of the servants and a donkey so I can hurry to the man of God and then come right back. Why go today? He asked. It's neither a new moon festival nor a Sabbath. So again, your son's just died, mum wants to go and get help, and dad's saying, well, why go today? Why not wait until there's a better day? So it's interesting how dad responds. And from what I've read, I did a bit of research as well, where it says how far the prophet lived away from her. It was, some people say they believe it was around about 15, 16 miles. So, 28, 30 kilometres, somewhere thereabouts. And she's hurrying on a donkey. But she said, it will be all right. So mum said to dad, it will be all right. So she saddled the donkey and said to the servant, hurry, don't slow down unless I tell you to. So obviously she's sitting on the donkey, the servant's probably in front, walking, leading it, trotting, running. Don't slow down unless I tell you to. As she approached the man of God at Mount Carmel, Elisha saw her in the distance, and he said to Gehazi, his servant, look, the woman from Shunem is coming. Run out to meet her and ask her, is everything all right with you, your husband, and your child? Yes, the woman told Gehazi, everything is fine. But when she came to the man of God at the mountain, she fell to the ground before him and caught hold of his feet. I think this is very important as well. That sometimes we need to get to the source, not the servant. Sometimes we need to get right to God, not necessarily other people around us. When we've got that problem in our life that only God can fix, then he's the one we need to go and see, not others around us. We need to get to the source. But not only that, it says that she latched onto his feet and she wouldn't let go. Sometimes I can let go a bit too soon. Sometimes I can let go without asking enough. But the servant began to push her away, but the man of God said, leave her alone. She is deeply troubled, but the Lord has not told me what it is. Then she said, did I ask you for a son, my Lord? And didn't I say, don't deceive me and get my hopes up? So does that happen in our lives sometimes? You know, God gives us something and then something might go wrong along the way. And we say, well, I didn't ask for that in the first place. You need to take it back. You need to fix it. Then Elisha said to Gehazi, get ready to travel. Take my staff and go. Don't talk to anyone along the way. Quickly, go quickly and lay the staff on the child's face. But the boy's mother said, as surely as the Lord lives and you live yourself, I won't go home unless you go with me. So Elisha returned with her. And again, this is where she's grabbed on and she's not letting go until he says, yeah, I'll come with you. And you notice there that she says, as surely as the Lord lives. So to me, that sort of says that through this journey, she's come to believe in the Lord through what she's seen and heard of this man, this prophet, and what they've done in her life. Gehazi hurried on ahead and laid the staff on the child's face, but nothing happened. There was no sign of life. He returned to meet Elisha and told him, the child is still dead. When Elisha arrived, the child was indeed dead. Lying there on the prophet's bed, he went in alone and shut the door behind him and prayed to the Lord. Again, we see he shut the door behind him. Same thing, two different stories. Shut the door behind you. When you've got some serious praying to do, shut the door. You don't need distractions. And he prayed to the Lord. Then he lay down on the child's body, placing his mouth on the child's mouth, his eyes on the child's eyes, and his hands on the child's hands. And as he stretched out on him, the child's body began to grow warm. Elisha got up, walked back and forth across the room once, and then stretched himself out again on the child. This time the boy sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. It's almost like the original form of mouth to mouth when someone stopped breathing. That's what we do now, CPR. This is like the first time. I wondered why. Why did he get up and walk across the room once and then back again? I don't know. I don't have the answer, but I'm sure if I dug a little deeper, there would be a very good reason. And then I also wondered, what's the importance of the child sneezing 7 times? And we'll get to that in a minute. Then Elisha summoned Gehazi. Call the child's mother, he said. And when she came in, Elisha said, here, take your son. She fell at his feet and bowed before him, overwhelmed with gratitude. Then she took her son in her arms and carried him downstairs. Two stories, very different circumstances. One lady has nothing, has no hope. One lady has everything materially, but is hoping for a child. Where was God in the two stories? Right in the middle. It just shows us that no matter what we've got, how much money we have, how many houses we have, how little we have, God's right in the middle. You have nothing, you have everything. We still need God. Both stories are miracles, aren't they? But remember I said that when there's a miracle to happen, we can't just sit around and do nothing. Both women had to do something. Both women were given an instruction and they had to follow it. Otherwise the miracle wouldn't have happened. What if the rich lady had just sat there in a house and prayed to God to heal her son once he died? What if she just did that? He probably would have just stayed dead. What if the poor lady just sat there and prayed, God, I need someone to come and help me. God, I need some money. God, I've got 2 kids that need your help. God, help me. Both times he told them to do something. You know, I've heard many times that if it's God's will, it'll happen. And you've got to be really careful about how we take that. It's not God's will for kids to get taken into slavery. It's not God's will for kids to die. He's a God of love. It's God's will for kids to be healed and to grow up loving him. But it's important that along the way, we have to do what he's asked us to do. We can't just sit there and pray. Sometimes we have to get up and move. And that's the same in these 2 stories. And hold on to him. When you get there, hold on. Go to God, straight to the source. Don't talk to the servant, talk to the source. So what was the importance of the sneezing 7 times? When we sneeze, it's generally because something's got into our system that's irritating inside our nose, inside our head. And this is interesting. I didn't learn until this week that when you sneeze, that sneeze comes out at 360 kilometres per hour. That's pretty fast. In researching this about the 7 sneezes, several of the Bible commentators that I researched, the comparison of the sneezing represents sin in our life. The boy had to sneeze not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 7 times to make sure that everything that was bad was out of his system. How does that relate to us? God uses in the Bible the number 7 many times throughout the Bible. It's an example of completion in God's terms, of perfection in God's terms. How does it relate to the sin in our life? Well, when we accept Christ, we have to die to ourselves. So just like the boy died, we have to get rid of the sin in our lives. So we have to sneeze 7 times. The sin's got to go. And then we need to be reborn. So the sneezing is like repenting. So when we accept Christ, we die to ourselves, we repent, we come to life. So it's interesting that's an example of this story. He's died, he sneezed, he's come to life. You've got to remember sometimes 1 or 2 sneezes isn't enough. Sometimes we need to make sure we get to 7 to get out everything that's inside of us. We have to be cleansed. And as I was writing this, it reminded me in John 13 when Jesus is washing the disciples' feet. Everyone heard this story? And he comes to Simon Peter, and Peter says to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, you don't understand now what I'm doing, but someday you will. And Peter replies, no, you'll never ever wash my feet. And Jesus replied, unless I wash you, you won't belong to me. And then he says, well, you better wash my hands and my head and everything else as well then. You know, you've got to be cleansed of everything, not just your feet. The boy resurrected from death to life. Again, can you imagine that boy and his mother moving forward after that, the testimonies that they both would have told to the people that they came in touch with. She was obviously an influential woman. She was a woman of wealth, so she was meeting lots of people. 2 stories, completely different. God's right in the middle. And that's exactly the same today. You know, we've got people from all different types of situations in their life here in this room today. Where's God? He's right in the middle. He's calling you, he's calling you, he's calling you, he's calling you. And I know we're all believers here today. But not everyone out there is. And it's up to us as the believers to not do it in here, as we know. It's not about us doing it here, it's about us doing it out there. Where the people are hurting. Where the people are just about to get their kids taken away from them. They're the ones that need our help. They're the ones that need us to go to them and share this stuff with them, to pray for them. Again, it's not good enough for us to sit here today and just pray, God, help the people. How is he helping? He's calling us to go to them. And that's where we have to put feet on God's promises. We've got to get to the people. We can't do it from here. And that's for me as much as anyone, because sometimes it's hard to pray for someone in a shopping centre when there's other people around and listening. But they're the times that the people need us. You know, you might come across your friend that's got cancer in the shopping aisle. That's a great time to pray for them. That's putting feet on God's instructions. You know? This is where we have to stretch ourselves to do what God's asking us to do. Where would these people have been without Elisha going and talking to them and doing what God asked him to do? Probably dead. So as we finish up today, let's just be thankful that God's called us to be his hands and feet. Let's be excited about it. Let's just go out there this week and be intentional about spreading the message to someone. Start just with one person. If all of us here today vow to God today, right, we're all going to go out and touch one person this week. And then that person might talk about what we've done, and multiplication is going to happen. Before you know it, we're all from different areas. We're all going to different areas this week. Before you know it, by the end of the week, God's word has worked 1,000 kilometres around us. That's pretty good, hey? So let's be thankful to God. Let's be encouraged to go and do it this week. Let's say, God, yes, we are going to reach one person this week. We're going to speak to one person whether we get embarrassed or not. Doesn't matter whether it's at work or wherever it may be. The Spirit will give you an urging. And I encourage you to do it. Push through. And when you do it, you'll think, that wasn't so bad. I can do that again.
Thanks for joining us today. To find out more information about our church or services, you can contact us by emailing office@oasislife.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, or join our WhatsApp group. Thanks again and have a great week.